You met this person, right? They're just so overtly religious that they just seem like they're from a different planet altogether. They don't have the same concerns on their mind as you do. They don't have the same questions about life that you do. And everything is, maybe you run into this person, everything is God told me, God told me, God told me, God told me. And it's like, man, I wish I had that hotline to heaven, because I would have a lot more wisdom than I do now if I just had that direct line. You've met that person. They're just so overtly religious that they become odd, that they become weird, that they don't feel like they're in this world, that they're from some alien planet. They landed here and they don't speak our language, and they don't know what it's like to live on this planet. And, even like, it's just, they get really weird, right? So this series that we're starting today, UnReligious, is not about being irreligious. It's about shedding the weirdness of the religion out to kind of get something that actually works in the world, that actually works with the life that you do have, and the questions you have, and the people you have to live around and with. We have to be able to understand, how does my faith actually play itself out in the life that I do have, and not try to put on like the religious show and the religious persona that we think we ought to have, and do like this best impersonation of who we think we ought to be, instead of really understanding who God has made us to be in the life that we actually have, in the lives that we have to actually live, and in the worlds and communities that we're planted within. So to be unreligious is not necessarily to be irreligious, but it's to kind of shed the weirdness out of the religion so that your faith kind of makes sense in the practical realm. You know what it's for. You know what to do with it. You know how it functions in your everyday life, and it actually helps you become a better person. So unreligious is not necessarily irreligious. We're going to talk about how to shed the anxiety out of your religion so that you can actually be who you are and be more comfortable in your own skin. Because a lot of religious people are putting on the religious show because they're very anxious about themselves and how they look before you and before God. And so they have to put on the show. They have to put on the impersonation of what they think a person of faith ought to look like and say and do and be in the world. And this is more about shedding the facade of religion that anxiety demands of us. That's what we're going to go in the next couple of weeks with this series, is kind of getting rid of that whole anxiety-ridden, I gotta be perfect, I gotta be good, I gotta be, whenever you got that gotta be going on there's anxiety driving that. And it'd be a whole lot easier in your life if you shed the anxiety and just did the thing that makes you more of who you are and who God made you to be. So that's where we're gonna go with this series. So it's not irreligious, but it is unreligious. Because religion is never satisfied. Is never, ever, ever satisfied. Jesus has this really odd opening statement where he says, what am I going to compare this generation? It's like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to one another, we played the flute for you, and you didn't even dance. We wailed, and you did not mourn. And John comes eating and drinking, or neither eating or drinking, and you say he has a demon. And the Son of Man comes eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, and a friend of tax collectors and sinners. You see, I used to be like this fundamentalist that was like, I was known for what I didn't do, not what I did do. I was you're one of those Christians, so you don't. And then you don't, and you don't, and you don't, and you don't. And there's a whole list of don'ts. And I wasn't really known for what I did, I was known for what I didn't do. And I was very proud of that. And I like to display that. I was really good at displaying that. And people would say, man, there's a good religious person right there. And I met a Lutheran that just totally messed me up. I'm this fundamentalist person, and I'm in a Christian band, and we play Christian music at Christian shows, and I show up at a Lutheran church to play a show, because we booked the show for their youth group, and their youth pastor comes out. He was not a Christian like me at all. He drank beer I was like, whoa, we don't do that. We're sorry, you can't be a Christian and drink beer. That's just, no, you can't do that, right? Where's that in the Bible? I don't know, but you can't, right? He cussed in front of me, and I was like, this guy, oh my gosh, he's cussing, he's drinking, and then, worst of all, he listened to non-Christian rock music. Lord have mercy. Oh my God, he was blowing my mind. I'm like, wait, and you're a pastor? You're allowed to do these things and you're a pastor? Well, if you're a Lutheran, yes. Because if you know anything about Luther, you know, like Martin Luther from the 1600s or 1500s, I can't remember now. He was one of the most crass, vulgar, beer-drinking people in the world. So he was just, you know, being like Martin Luther was. If you've ever read any of Martin Luther's quotes, they're some of the funniest things in all of religious writings. So you go Google, when we're done here, funny Martin Luther quotes. And if I hear giggling, I know you did it before you left. But he is just off the wall kind of a thing. But here I am, like this very religious person, very weird because I don't. And I get around this Lutheran guy and I'm like, whoa, wait a second. He's like, he does all those things that I don't do. And he's still a pastor and he still loves Jesus. And I'm like, wait a sec, this is confusing me. I don't know. I didn't know how to make sense of it. And so here we have this passage here, and John the Baptist is mentioned. John the Baptist is that guy who went out to the desert because the world was evil and he wanted to get away from it. And he's wandering around the desert. And I think John the Baptist actually would have made a pretty good Baptist because he didn't drink, he didn't cuss, but he didn't go to church. So, you know, that would have been one thing that the Baptist would have not been happy about. He did not go to church. And you can't do that if you're... So John, he was a part of a group, probably called the Essenes, and they basically retreated to the desert because they thought the temple system was all corrupt that the Jews worshipped in, and the Roman government that oversaw everything, they were all corrupt, and it's all just blown up. Let's just go out to the desert where there's nobody, and they practice something called asceticism, which we do that every now and then. Like for Lent, you give up coffee, which is dumb, or chocolate, or, you know, or beef, or something like that. You give up something for Lent. You're like punishing your body, you know, for a time so that you can become better in soul. It's called asceticism. He practiced Lent like all the time. He was like, I'd never, and I never, and I don't, and I gave up, and I never will, and all the don'ts. He didn't do all the don'ts, right? Like he was a double negative equals I can't remember. But he didn't do all those things, so he would have made a really good Baptist. He was really into purity. You know, your actions have to be utterly sparkling pure. He was really into studying the scriptures. And they're the ones, this group is actually the ones that saved pieces of scripture for us called the Dead Sea Scrolls, if you've ever heard of that. This group that John the Baptist was probably a part of called the Essenes. There was different sects of them out in the desert, and one of them actually preserved one of the oldest manuscripts of Isaiah that we have. So that's kind of cool that they did that, but they were very much into scriptures, and they're very into end times. So he's going to be a really good Baptist because the world's about to end all the time. If you know a Baptist, the world's about to end. Jesus is about to come back, and the rapture is about to happen, and Armageddon's about to happen, and the Antichrist is about to come. And they've been saying that for about the last 100 years. And it's like, okay, I'm getting tired of that one, but you never know. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But that's not the point of my faith, is waiting for the end. But it was the point of theirs. They were into end times. They're like, the Messiah is about to come. He's about to open the door and come in and judge the whole world, so we better be on his good side. So he would have made a good Baptist. A very good Baptist. Actually, they didn't call him John the Baptist because he was a Baptist, but because he was dunking people under the water. Now, Jesus was more like the Lutheran. He was, I'm not going to say Jesus was a Lutheran, but he was like a Lutheran. He was drinking. He was eating. He was going to parties. He did all of the things that were the opposite of John the Baptist. He hung out with tax collectors and sinners, like, oh, you're hanging out with who? Like, wow, really? You're letting that woman come in and have dinner in your house among these people? Really? Like, you turned water into wine and then handed it out at a party, at a wedding? Like, you're giving alcohol to people? Like, Jesus was more like the Lutheran guy. And notice the Pharisees' response. The Pharisees are the religious people, right? They're the ones who are overseeing the whole temple system and making sure everyone obeys all the right rules, because if we don't obey all the right rules, we're in trouble. you think that they would be very happy with John the Baptist. Nope, he's crazy because he doesn't participate in our church system that we have built, the temple system. He's crazy because he's out in the desert and he doesn't go to church. So he's obviously got a demon and he's crazy. And then there comes Jesus. He's like, I'll do things the opposite of John. I'm going to be eating and drinking. You're going to call me a glutton and a drunkard. And I'm going to hang out with these people at parties. And then the Pharisees are like, look at that guy. He's totally immoral. He's not pure. He's not a good person. He's not a good religious person. See, what's going on here is anxiety. The Pharisees are really anxious. They got to get everything right. They got to get everything perfect. And if they don't get it right and perfect, then God's not happy with them. And God won't send the Messiah to come and fix everything. So they have to be perfect, and then they have to make everybody else perfect. Have you ever been around that kind of religious person where they have like this persona that they're perfect, and then you're like, I know I'm not perfect, and then I get in their presence and they're trying to make me perfect, and that's anxiety. That's religious anxiety. Religious anxiety is like, is God happy with me? Am I doing this right? You know, did I mess it up today? Did I screw things up today? Religious anxiety like plagues the religious people because they're constantly thinking about, I'm messing up, I'm not perfect, and I need to be perfect. And if I'm not perfect, then I'm not doing it right, and God's not happy. And here comes Jesus, and he's like, what should I compare this generation to? That is an old way of saying, hey, have you ever met somebody like this? And then he gives an illustration. So have you ever met someone like this, where they get around somebody who's like super staunch and religious, and they're like, wow, that person is messed up. And then they get around someone who's not super staunch and religious, and they're like, wow, that person is really messed up. Because they're not like me. And I have to be the standard here in the room of religiousness and goodness and all this stuff. That is religious anxiety playing itself out. And Jesus is saying, you know what, you're not happy with John the Baptist who did it all right, and you're not happy with me who you perceive as doing it all wrong. There's no way to make a religious person happy because religion is never satisfied because you're never perfect. You never get there. But the religious person thinks they have to be. The overtly religious person thinks they have to be perfect and get it right and get it down. And if they don't, then God's not happy. So what do? They're not perfect. Everyone knows they're not perfect. So what do? They pretend, and they put on that impersonation of who they think they ought to be instead. And they especially do that when they get around other people. And that's all religious anxiety. Thomas Merton said something like this when he said, we make religious faces at ourselves in the mirror, and we think our experience of ourselves is an experience of God. And it's not really quite like that. But that's what people, you know, we reflect back to one another. We're humans. We reflect back to one another. That's why we have conversations and share stories and like to have meals, because we like to see ourselves reflected back in one another. And you are the mirror for that. When that religious person gets around you, all of a sudden you're their mirror, and they got to put on the show, and they got to act like this, and they got to say these words and use this vocabulary, and God told me this, and God told me that, and all this, I don't do this, I don't do that. What they're doing with their anxiety is making religious faces at you because they want to see the reflection of God back at them, because you're the mirror in that moment. And that's actually not what faith is all about. That's actually not how it works. One of my favorite authors, Richard Rohr, said this: the way of Jesus frees us from religious anxiety, liberating us to be fully present, unburdened by ego management, and embracing the ever-changing dance of life. And then Jesus says something really interesting next. He says, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and have revealed them to infants. Yet, Father, such was your gracious will. Now, you've done this. I know you've done this. You walked into a grocery store and you have said the words, I won't need a cart. You said it, right? You've done it. And then all of a sudden you look like this guy. And you're just like, oh, I should have got that cart. And then you find yourself running back to the front of the store to put everything in the cart because, oh, you needed the cart, right? If you go to the grocery store and you say, I don't need a cart, and then you walk in, you're like, but I do need that, but I do need that, but I do need that. You're absolutely limited in what you can carry out of that store when you don't have a cart. Now, it's the same when we approach life this way, and we're like, I don't need to learn because I've got it all figured out. I am good. I've figured it out. I am perfect. I am the religious person. Who needs curiosity? Who needs questions? Who needs any of that? I've got it all figured out. You're like the person who walked in the store without saying, I'm not going to need a cart. And then you're like, wait a second, life experiences are now hitting me, and I have another box, and all of a sudden you don't have enough room in your life to answer the questions that are actually coming at you. When you say, all of my religion needs to fit into this mold, this concept, this way of thinking, being, vocabulary, everything, all of it fits inside this little box, and I don't need anything else, I got it all figured out. And all of a sudden you find yourselves with an armful of questions that life is thrown at you, and you don't got a cart to handle it because you thought your faith was this big, and it fit in this box, and it was totally good and perfect, and you know what? That's what growth is all about. When you walk in and you're like, I became a Christian, I've accepted Christ, I've figured this, I'm good. I have figured it all out, I'm good. I walk in, and now what do I need? I don't need anything else because I have arrived. I'm good. I know scriptures, I know this, I'm happy, I'm this. And then all of a sudden life throws stuff at you and you're like, I don't have room for this what do I do with this? I'll just hang on to this. And then all of a sudden what Jesus is saying here, you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and revealed them to infants. So I did a little artificial intelligence thing this week. I asked AI, our robot overlords, to give me the most complex religious question with the biggest words it can come up with, because I just wanted to see what it would ask. It was amazing. I don't know what it means, but it's so good. I'm going to read you this question. This is the deepest spiritual question that our robot overlords can imagine right now. You ready for it? This is great. Okay, how can humans contemplate the ultimate ontological nature of divinity in relation to the human experience, encompassing the intricate interplay between immanence and transcendence, and the epistemological challenge of reconciling the ineffable nature of the divine with human attempts at conceptualization and understanding within the within the limitations of finite cognition? So that's our question that we're supposed to it didn't answer this question, by the way, it just gave me the question. We now have an expert in the room. According to Jesus, we have an expert who's going to answer this question for us. I thank you, Lord, that you've hidden these things from the intelligent and revealed them to infants. Somehow this little baby has an answer to the deepest spiritual questions that we can think of, or even artificial intelligence can think of. Now, if that question hits me, and I even know what it means, which I don't, I'm gonna go to like the philosophers and the theologians and the pastors and the writers and the authors and the poets I'm not gonna go up to a small little baby and be like, can you explain to me the intricacies of the transcendence and blah, 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 blah. The baby's just gonna look at me and be like, can you change my diaper? Because I pooped. It's like, how is this what Jesus is saying here, that all of a sudden all of these great, wonderful spiritual truths have been hidden from the wise? Because the wise think that this question is important. That's why. The baby doesn't care. The baby is just living in the moment, living in this, I am loved, and this person loves me, and look at their face, they're smiling at me. The baby's totally different. So that's what infants get that we don't get. That's what they understand that we don't understand. And Jesus often praised the mindset of children. We think that we have to have everything figured out cognitively, and Jesus is the one praising children and babies and infants and saying, have the mind of these little ones. Be like children. And we're like, but do children really understand the intricacies of what it means to be baptized and have communion and be catechized and converted? And no, they don't. And it doesn't matter. Because Jesus says that we need to be like these kids, these children, and those kids, they don't get all bogged down with religious anxiety and big ontological questions of the nature of the universe and the divine and human relation within it. Those are fun little intellectual exercises, but they're not essential. The essential things are what children know and what babies know. This is actually called beginner's mind in world religions everywhere. Beginner's mind is a state of mind characterized by curiosity, receptivity, and a lack of preconceived assumptions. Preconceptions or assumptions. That's what beginner's mind is. And that's what kids have that we don't. Because we learn stuff as we get older, right? And that's a good thing, but we also learn bad things, like how to emotionally guard ourselves from the world and not to be vulnerable with people and not to be real and be ourselves. And we don't display emotion here and we don't talk about certain subjects over here. I remember when I was a kid, someone came and visited our house and I was like, oh, you're a teacher, that's cool. How much money do you make? And my parents kind of were like, whoa, hey, we don't ask those questions around here, right? We don't do that. I didn't know that. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm not supposed to ask that question. I didn't know that at the time, right? We learn things, but I asked that question out of curiosity. I asked that question because I wanted to know an answer. I was like, oh, I might want to be that one day. I wonder how much they make. And, right? That's what kids have that we don't. They have that curiosity, that receptivity, and a lack of the preconceptions and assumptions. Because if you can bring that with all the stuff that you have learned in your life to a situation, then all of a sudden you are what the Bible calls wise. If you can approach something with your experience and your expertise, but also approach it as if you've never heard this thing before, you've never seen it before, how would I approach this problem, this question, this relationship, if I had never done anything like this before in my life? You have the mindset of a child in that moment. And Jesus says that is something to be praised. That is something that is good. Cultivate a sense of humility, openness, and receptivity to new possibilities, or else you get stuck. You get stuck and bogged down in a certain way of being, and you get in a repetitive loop with your life, and all of a sudden you're bored and everyone's bored, and it's like, you know what? Have the mind of a child. Break it up. Try something new. Go somewhere different. That's really hard for me. That one is really hard. I'm a creature of routine. I have a certain way that I take to get places. I was driving to the library with the whole family, and I'm taking my normal route to the library. And I make my turn, and Isaac next to me, who will have the mind of a child for his whole life, he was like, is there a different way to the library? So it's like, yeah, there's lots of them actually. Let's take one of those. I was like, okay, we'll take one of those. And I had to go and find a whole new path. That threw me off. Didn't like it, right? But children, the mind of a child has humility, openness, receptivity to new possibilities. And it helps us break free from mental habits, assumptions, biases. And then it enables a deeper connection with the present moment and a more authentic understanding of yourself and the world. This is what having the mind of a child does. And Jesus praises it. And Richard Rohr said this about that. Faith is a positive way to open yourself up to a larger field of reality, which is always mystery. God is not the thing that you figure out. God is the mystery that you enter into. And religion is a system that tends to codify and control that mystery. That's why religious people are often often more fearful and small-minded. They've confused their belief system with the mystery itself. But once you've encountered the mystery itself, your religious practice becomes a way of honoring and holding the mystery for yourself and others. And that's the big difference. So what does Jesus say about all this? He says, you gotta take it easy. I think, was that the Eagles that said that? We gotta take it easy. That's what he says. Come to me, all of you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, what I think we want when we say, I want to be a good person of faith, what I think we're thinking of is like, oh, I found this awesome comic book picture. It's like this really, I don't know when, that was from like 1936. She's one of the very first superheroes of the world. I'll even show it to the online folks. Look at that. All right, I'll come back. That is what we picture when we want to be. Like, I love Marvel movies. I love the superhero movies. I always have. When I was a kid, I loved Superman, watching Christopher Reeves, fly around the earth and back time up so he can save his loved one. That was just amazing, right? And when we think of being a person of faith, we think we got to be like this superhero that is like conquering the world for God and converting the masses and doing all this stuff. And Jesus actually says that, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And all of a sudden, when we overburden ourselves with all this anxiety and expectation, and I got to do this and don't do this and fulfill all this, and all of a sudden life becomes heavy. And then when you add religious anxiety to it, it becomes heavier. And that's not what faith is supposed to feel like. Faith is not supposed to feel like an added weight to your life. That you're supposed to, now I got to figure out my life, but I also got to figure out this faith thing, and how do I add that to the top of this? And now everything's just a lot more heavy than it was. And then people walk away from the faith being like, I can't do that. I don't do it. And they think they've walked away from faith when they've really just walked away from the religious codified part of it, because it was too heavy and they couldn't do it. And they're like, I'm done. So Jesus here says that faith is going to make life easier. Oh, that's interesting. Because that's not how I grew up. I grew up that faith is like this constricting thing that you have to fit yourself inside of. You have to conform yourself to it, your brain, your body, your mind, everything, to a preconceived set of beliefs and behaviors and all this stuff. And then you can belong. And if you veer out of that, then you're ousted from the community and you're kicked out and you don't belong here and get out of here. Right? Right now I'm on a 25-pound lifting restriction because I have an enlarged aorta on my heart. And they don't know why. They're trying to figure that out. I got to go back in the fall for another scan to see if it got bigger, see if it got smaller. But I can't lift more than 25 pounds. You know how irritating that is to somebody who wants to be the superhero? Like, I went to TSC and I had to buy a bale of hay. It weighs 40 pounds. Is that more than 25? Yes. There's this little teenage girl. And I'm like, could you help me? I need you to lift that thing for me and put it on my cart. I felt so dumb, right? Like, and she's like, oh, sure. And she's just like, whoa, boom. I was like, wow, that was really cool. You probably did that better than I could have if I wanted to, right? And then I was like trying to justify myself. You see, I'm on, my cardiologist put me on a 25-pound lifting restriction because if I got a heart thing. And she's like, oh, no problem. You want me to take it out to your car for you too? And I was like, I got that one. I popped the trunk and I just pushed the thing off. I was like, I could do that part. But it's really irritating because I want to conquer the world. I want to be the superhero. And all of a sudden I've been handed a 25-pound lifting restriction. And it's really hard to be reliant upon other people for help when you want to be the hero of everyone else's life. That's really difficult. And that's something that I've had to learn. Now, if being religious is a burden, you're more likely wrapped up in ego management and not the actual faith itself. Because we all want to be the superhero. We all want to be all powerful, all wise, all knowing. When people come to us with, a question or a situation, we want to be the ones that solve it. We want to be the ones that fix it. We want to be the ones that can, make everything good again and then walk away, I did something great. That's ego management. When I asked that teenage girl if she can lift up that hay bale for me, that's ego management. I want to be perceived a certain way. And I have to manage that in front of other people so that they know that I'm this kind of person and not that kind of person. And that is a burden. So if your religion is a burden to you, it's because you're managing ego. And Jesus actually says that he's meek and humble of heart. Okay, what does that mean? It sounds pretty soft to me. Sounds like he's a sissy. If you're going to do like modern day American values, being meek and humble, we don't need that. We need someone who's going to punch someone in the jaw for us, right? But Jesus says, I'm meek and humble. What is meekness? It's quiet power. That's what it is. It's somebody that could jack you in the jaw, but does not, because they don't believe in that. And have you ever gotten around someone that's absolutely strong, and you're just like, wow, they could totally take me down in a moment. We used to get milk from a farm, and there was cows there. I was so afraid of the cows. They were gentle, but I knew that they could snap me like a twig. Like, they were just big, humongous animals that weighed lots of pounds. I don't know how much a cow weighs. Lots. They weigh lots. I can't do anything. And they could break you on accident, right? But they were gentle and they were meek. They weren't going around like parading their strength around. They were just wandering around munching on some hay, right? Like, meekness is quiet power. It's a power that's confident in itself and doesn't need to announce itself. I'm better than you. Because as soon as you get into that realm, you're into ego management again. And you're just managing how people perceive you and how you think that they are thinking of you. And you want that to be good and not bad, so then you manage your perception in front of other people. Meekness doesn't need to do that. Meekness is just quiet power. I don't gotta be all brash and just, nope. And humility is grounded strength. You know what you're good at, but you don't gotta brag about it. You're just standing on the ground of what you're good at. I know I'm good at this. I know I'm not good at that, but I know that I am good at this. I don't gotta brag about it. I don't gotta announce it. I'm just gonna do what I'm good at. That's humility. Humility is not when you go in the room and you're like, oh no, I'm a horrible person actually. You wouldn't like me in real life. Ego management again. You wanna be perceived as humble. And so you go in there and you start degrading yourself in front of people, and then people say, wow, so humble. And actually you're just, the flip side of pride is that whole, I'm just being humble here. I'm just being humble with myself. Humility is actually grounded strength that knows what it's good at and what it's not good at, and you just do what you're good at without making a big announcement about it. That's what Jesus says, that he's those things. He's meek and he's humble. And then he says that his yoke is easy. Well, here's a picture of a yoke. It's two oxen tied together with that big beam between them. And that's what they would use to plow fields. They would tie two oxen together with a yoke. And if you wanted to be a disciple of a rabbi, you would take upon the rabbi's yoke. All his teaching and how he does his life is called a yoke. And he's like, if you want to be like me, then strap on the other end of this yoke and we'll go together. And Jesus is actually saying, my teachings are easy. And the word easy there is not like simple, because sometimes it's really hard to love your enemy. The word easy there is like, hey, go easy on them. Go easy on them. Or take it easy. Or, hey, lighten up. Lighten up. That's what the word easy here is all about. Not like, oh, wow, this is so simple and easy. Like, it's not going to be very hard to do it. It's very hard to love your enemy and manage and stop managing your ego for religious purposes. But what Jesus is saying here is that the burden, the yoke, the thing that you need to carry, this is what he said about the Pharisees' yoke. He says, you tie up heavy loads that are hard to carry and put them on people's shoulders, but they themselves aren't willing to lift a finger to move them. Like, that's his criticism of the Pharisees from Matthew 23. He's like, they're gonna make these big, huge religious expectations and then put it on people's shoulders and be like, see ya. Have fun carrying that around. And they're actually not going to be able to lift it themselves and do it themselves, but they're going to make you believe that you ought to be doing it when they can't do it themselves. And that is what Jesus says, don't try to carry that religious yoke. Don't try to carry all those religious expectations. That's not the point. This yoke is easy. Like, I'm going to take it easy on you. It's not going to be really difficult to figure this out. It's just about living the Sermon on the Mount life. And it's light. When you're like going through the woods and you're backpacking around, you want something light. You don't want something that's heavy. You want to be able to be quick and agile. And that's what the word light means. When soldiers would walk around, they would have light burdens because they needed to be able to do battle immediately in that moment. And they needed to have things that allowed them to be quick and agile. And he says the result of living this Sermon on the Mount life is you will find rest for your soul, which means you're going to get a breather. If you actually take on the way of Christ, stop managing your ego and stop trying to do an impersonation of who you think you ought to be, you get a breather from life. Like, oh my gosh, okay, I don't have to try and worry myself that God's upset with me all the time. I don't have to worry myself that I'm not religious enough or perfect enough or good enough or this enough or that enough. I can just take a breather and just be me. And that is exactly what faith is designed to do, is wake you up to who God made you to be so you can do it better. Not to make you like this alien from a different planet that plops down and you're like, I'm a very religious person. It's like, oh gosh, I don't like hanging around those types of people. They make me tired, right? Thomas Merton says this, in humility is the greatest freedom. As long as you have to defend the imaginary self that you think is important, you lose a piece of your heart. And when you stop doing that, when you stop using your religion to try and project this imaginary perfect self out into the world, you regain who you are. The pieces of the heart that you threw away and cast aside that you thought were not important anymore. That you're like, well, this part of me doesn't fit in being a Christian, so I can't have that. I'll just chuck that aside and chuck that aside. And then all of a sudden you've like put yourself into this cookie cutter mold of who you think you ought to be. And you walk around and parts of you have been abandoned. And Christ is like, I love that part of you. Bring it back. Bring it back. Get out of the mold. Get out of that cookie cutter. Let's become who you are. That's what your faith designed to do. Now our benediction today is a poem by a farmer, and his name is Wendell Berry. He's one of my favorite philosophers, theologians, and farmers. And his name is Wendell Berry, and it's called The Peace of Wild Things. Because we like things that are like, we think that we have to sterilize our faith and put it inside of a building, and you could go for a walk and encounter God. And this poem recounts that. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting for their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of a world, and I am free.